leadership isn't really about us as the leader, and yet who we are as the leader plays a huge role in our ultimate success or failure as a leader. In other words, if we want to be a better leader who serves outcomes and others effectively, we must work on ourselves too. And that is what we're talking about today, ourselves as leaders, and what we can learn from psychology to help us understand ourselves better and then ultimately lead better. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us live in the future on your favorite social platform. You can find out when those episodes will happen, and so there you can therefore join us by joining us on our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, two of the places where we simulcast these live events. You can just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to learn more, get connected, and find out when we'll be live. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a set of tools to create great results for their organizations and team members. That's what Flexible Leadership provides you. Learn more and order your copy now at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And with that, it's time for me to bring in our guest. Let me pull him up here, and then I will appropriately introduce him, and then we'll dive in. My guest today is Sebastien Page. He is the head of global multi-asset and the chief investment officer at T. Rowe Price. He has more than 2 decades of leadership experience and has done extensive research on positive sports and personality psychology. He currently oversees a team of investment professionals actively managing over $500 billion in assets under management. He has written 2 finance books, Beyond Diversification: What Every Investor Needs to Know, and then co-authored Factor Investing and Asset Allocation. He's won 6 annual research award paper awards. He has appeared regularly on CNBC, and he was on Bloomberg TV again this morning, and in 2022 was named a top voice in finance by LinkedIn. He has been quoted extensively in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Barron's. His latest book, and the reason he's here, is not to talk about beyond diversification or factor investing, but his new book, The Psychology of Leadership. It is the focus of our conversation. He's joining me today, I'm sure probably from his office, but he lives in Maryland with his wife and children. Sebastien, so glad to have you with me this morning.
Kevin, I'm super excited. First of all, I love doing podcasts. And second, you just held the book and you had all these Post-it notes. That means we're going to have a really good discussion.
Or these are all the things I didn't agree with. No, that's not true.
Okay.
I'm totally teasing. I am totally teasing. I am excited to have you. I love the book. And, there are some folks that have recommended it that apparently you know, and that I know as well, which is fantastic. And so let's just dive in. You're in the finance world. You've written books about the finance world. And so now this. So the intro says, well, yes, you're in the finance world, but you're also a leader. But why? What leads you here? Like, why? What's your journey to this book, and specifically, why this book?
Kevin, I was struggling with some job-related stress at the time, and I decided to look into sports psychology. I met with a sports psychologist who lives here in Maryland. His name is Dr. Daniel Zimmett. He's a fascinating guy. In addition to being a sports psychologist, he also holds 40 national titles in the sport of handball.
I think it was only 38 when you wrote in the book. I think I read 38.
He keeps winning. And so this is like, it looks like squash, but you're hitting the ball with your hands. So this is a sports psychologist who's figured out the mental game of high performance in practice. So we sit down, and he tells me the story of his best match ever. And it's fascinating because it was like 10 years ago. He remembers every point in the match. He remembers where the ball was, at what time. He remembers, he's got like a tear in his eyes. I was on my knees and I make an extreme shot, and then the play by play. And then it's a complete letdown because he goes, oh, and then I lost the next 2 points. I go, wait, time out. You lost the game? And he goes, absolutely, I lost the game. But to him, it had nothing to do with how happy he was about that match. In the mindset of a sports psychologist, he was playing a much stronger opponent. And that day, he realized he belonged in another league in the game. He had gone through a step change in his skills. And the win or the loss, it meant nothing to him. And so I started thinking about this mindset, and we started talking, and he became a consultant for the book, and he helped me with the research and some ideas. But just that mindset of sports psychology. And by the way, so many links that are unexplored between sports psychology and business leadership, but also with investment and investing. So there's a lot of that in the psychology of leadership.
And we'll get to some of that. Oh, by the way, to finish the story, none of the championships were won until after that.
That's
loss,
right.
Right. Which
That's
is a
right.
useful component of that.
I
story
mean,
as well.
look, Kevin, like I talk about this in the book. Federer went viral maybe a year ago. I don't know if you caught this. He was speaking to students who are graduating at commencement. And he said, okay, one
It's
of the
right
best.
here.
Yeah. Was it one of the Post-its? Oh, I see. It was underlined.
Yeah.
So Federer goes, I've played 1,500 games in my career, and I've won about 80% of them. So that makes sense. One of the top tennis players of all time. But then he looks at the students and he says, guess the percentage of points that I've won. And the answer is 54%, which is just a slight edge repeated over time consistently. But then he went on to say, whatever game you play in life, you're going to lose. So my journey for this book was, I was stressed out about job stress, and I just wanted to learn to embrace it and maximize performance around job stress and how to handle it. So sports psychology became super interesting in that context. And then I expanded into positive psychology as well as personality psychology, which is a lot of fun.
So yeah, we can talk about, I want to talk a little bit more about why you ended up with the 3, but I want to say something first. For me, I'm a sports fan. And so those kinds of stories intrigue me, and I know intrigue many, but but turn some people off. So what I want to say first is that while there are all sorts of great insights in this book from the world of sports and sports psychology, that's not what this book is. And so if you're listening and saying, well, Kevin, I'll listen next week because you won't have a sports guy on, I would say no, that this is not a book that leans so far there as to be nor will this conversation lean so far there as to be a turnoff to those of you that aren't sports fans and would rather, do anything than watch the Super Bowl, for example.
It's not a book about sports.
At all,
It's about
really.
resilience, mental resilience. Sports psychology is fascinating because it's not about winning, it's about losing and what you do with the setbacks and the losses. That applies to your entire life, your professional life, your leadership, and more.
100%. So why you sort of told us how sports psychology became a part of your thinking, which led to the book, but why the other two? Why positive psychology and personality psychology? How do they inform the book, and why are they important in this conversation? Excuse me.
I started to think about long-term goals. And when you think about long-term goals, the longer term you think, the longer your time horizon, the closer you get to positive psychology questions. What makes people thrive over time? What makes leaders and organizations thrive over the very long run? But Kevin, for goals, let me tell you another story. My friend Phil sold his cryptocurrency business for $1 billion, and he gave all of it to charity. You remember this from the book itself.
Mhm.
And that morning, when he decided to give all of it away, he was eating his cereal in his kitchen. An angel appeared to him. So this is where I disclosed this is a made-up story.
Yeah, I'm reading the first part. I'm like, oh, this is good. And then, oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
All right, go ahead.
So the angel goes, look, I'm going to give you one of three gifts. I can give you infinite power. I can give you infinite fame, or I can give you infinite wisdom, or I actually, and then he offered absolute wealth. Like I can give you just whatever you want in terms of money for your entire life. And so my friend chose wisdom. And as you would expect, first time in human history that someone has absolute wisdom, cameras flashing, journalists convene. What will the person with absolute wisdom say? It's the first time in human history this happens. And the story goes, he said, I should have taken the money.
Funny, I should have taken. Yeah, I literally laughed out loud when I got
And
to that
and
point.
you know, this is tongue in cheek, but it's to help my readers reflect on positive psychology and long-term goals. I asked a group of students, I was presenting on stage a couple weeks ago to about 1,000 students, and there were maybe Kevin, Gen Z, right? So university students, roughly. And I said, how many of you would take a gummy bear out of a jar of 100 gummy bears, knowing that 4 of them are poison and are going to kill you? And I said, if I give you $1 million, would you do it? Just for the record, Kevin, you wouldn't do it, right?
No, not
Oh,
likely.
so this is
I
a way
also
to,
know where this is headed, so I'm
it's a
probably
way
not.
to frame positive psychology. But I was genuinely taken aback on stage by the number of hands that went up. I would pick a gummy out of 100, knowing that 4 are poison for $1 million. I got maybe 15% of the audience, maybe 20. And so to me, that speaks to what I call goal-induced blindness, where you have a goal, it's measurable, right? You want to be wealthy, you want that amount, and you sacrifice your well-being, you take on reasonable risks, or even you start cheating, sacrifice your sense of ethics. So positive psychology will show that over time, people's happiness, ability to thrive is driven by one single factor more than wealth, fame, wisdom. That's why the angel story, right? Which one would you pick? And that is the quality of people's relationships in their lives. And that's been studied over 80 years. It's one of the most fascinating studies I talk about in the book because it's been going on for several generations. And the findings are all about positive psychology. What makes people thrive over time? And so it's the quality of the relationship. And in the book, I also talk about other factors of positive psychology and how they relate to business and setting goals and managing people. Those are engagement, meaning. We talk a lot about the why. That's kind of a buzzword. And long term accomplishments. So I discovered that positive psychology has a ton of applications to business and leadership.
100%. So that four gummy story leads to one of the 18 principles in the book, and we're going to get to those in just a second. But as you mentioned to me before we went on camera, or I guess before I hit the live button, that you mentioned that there's quite a bit in the book about goals, and it's actually one of the things that I had in my notes. And so it's a book about leadership. It's a book about the psychology of leadership. And so why why is things related to goals, our relationships to goals, our thinking about goals such a huge part of the book? Why did you make that choice specifically?
Two things, Kevin. The number one job of the leader is to set the goals. Because if as a leader you don't set the goals, who will? Second, and this is going to sound like I'm selling my book, but I truly believe it. We're all leaders in one aspect or the other of our lives. It's not about managing, it's not just about managing people inside a corporation. It's about your family, and different people in the family will express leadership over time. It's about your community, it's about your church. So again, I'm conscious, like maybe I'm trying to broaden the audience. I do think anyone can benefit from better leadership in their own lives, even if they don't have people reporting to them. And so that's the second thing why it's so important to think about goals. Leaders set goals. If you don't, who will? Who will? And second, we're all leaders in some aspects of our lives.
Yeah, I often talk about capital L leaders are those people that have a job title, right? Have a responsibility, which is sort of the main focus, or what we would think of when we think of a book like this. But all of us in all sorts of our parts of our lives are small L leaders, right? Even at work, if we're on the team and not leading the team and all those sorts of things, because we are leading when people choose to follow, and some people are choosing to follow us on a regular basis, maybe more than we even realize.
That's so
Um,
well said, right? You might not be managing the team, but people take their cue from how you're behaving, how you're performing, and
for
whether you
good or
want,
ill, by the way,
yeah,
everybody.
what for good or ill, or whether you want it or not, you find yourself being a leader.
Yeah.
And having clarity on goals is key to effective leadership.
And of the 18 principles, there are some that are very much about goals. And one of them, and I've highlighted a couple. I know there are a couple that you wanted us to talk about, and I've highlighted a couple others that I thought would be useful for us to talk about. Hopefully, we can get to all of those, not to all 18, everybody, but you also wrote some of them in ways that are intriguing. And so you might be a finance guy, but you got a little marketing blood in you, my friend.
Thank
So
you.
the first one,
I'll take
principle
that as a
number.
compliment.
It's meant as one, I promise you. Principle number one, you say, don't die on Everest. And I put the question mark on there. Like, seriously, what are you talking about here? It's an extension of your gummy bear story. So what do you mean that we shouldn't die on, that we got to be careful not to die on Everest?
It's about goal-induced blindness. The number one example in the literature in psychology of goal-induced blindness are Everest deaths. My gummy example, where you have a 4% chance of dying, matches the probability that you'll die if you want to summit Everest based on historical data. So it's the prime example in the research in psychology of goal-induced blindness. But there are plenty of other examples. I had goal-induced blindness at the beginning of my career because I wasn't taking care of my health. I was working nonstop around the globe. I was traveling. I was jet lagged. I just wasn't taking care of myself. That's a form of goal-induced blindness. Another one is just losing your way in terms of ethics and cheating. That's a prime example, one of the best examples of goal-induced blindness. And you know, Kevin, this happens in business. Like blue chip, like really good companies. Volkswagen somehow decided they should actually fudge their emission numbers. Wells Fargo started creating dummy accounts just to show more accounts opened. That was the goal that they looked at, right? And the measurable goals are particularly potent in
So
that.
let me stop you right there, because I think everyone who's listening, if you remember either one of those, but if you remember the Wells Fargo thing, everyone who wasn't there would say, like, seriously, people are actually opening dummy accounts. And I think that's the point, that we become blinded by it. And the thing that struck me, and I've certainly read a lot about the research around Everest and all that, but the thing that you wrote that if I read before, I had forgotten. I don't know how I could have. You talk about people, there's a death zone. There's in this area in which
Yeah.
where most of those deaths that occur. And so you're talking about people like literally walking over dead people. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if they're actually visible or not, but the metaphorical power of that was incredible to me. But the point is that when the goal becomes we are so laser focused on it, whether it's getting to the top of the mountain or whether it's making the number if you're at Wells Fargo, we we it seems obvious to someone who's not there, but when you're in at that moment of blindness, it is really powerful. So what do
And
we need to be knowing about that to overcome that? Because none of us are probably going to climb Everest. If you have climbed Everest, let me know. I want to have you on the show. But I mean, that's not what any of us have done likely. So what do we need to take from that as leaders?
so, at the end of the chapter, Don't Die on Everest, I always have at the end of each principle a little sort of quirky conclusion just to keep my readers going in the psychology of leadership. And at the end of that one, I go, if you ever think about climbing Everest just because it's there or some other reason, here's the most useful advice you'll get in this entire book: don't. So my wife was reading my book and tried to help with editing, and so she said, "Okay, this is good." So the goal-induced blindness, first of all, you have to realize that it's a side effect of something that's important for success, which is measurable goals. I'm not here, Kevin, telling everybody abandon goals, abandon measurable goals. There are reasons why you might want to abandon goals for sure. But if you're running a business, you got to measure things. You want to compete, you want to have aggressive goals, and you want to go after them. And that includes for people making more money. Go ahead. That's not a bad goal on its own. So I just want to clarify that, put that caveat in place, because I don't want the two of us to sound like, okay, just don't have ambition, right? Or don't care about money. That's trite. However, where I go in the book is there's an optimal point, and there's a point beyond which you become so obsessed with your goal that you will suffer from goal-induced blindness. Now, your question was, what do you do about it? First of all, one of the most underrated skills in leadership is the ability to quit. Know when to quit. That's a skill you can build. Annie Duke, as she was kind enough to endorse my book, she's got a fantastic book just about quitting and how it's one of the most underrated skills in life, in poker, because she was a former professional poker player, and in business, when to fold. Um, the world record for Everest summits is like 30. And those that do that can go repeatedly, somewhat safely, because a lot of the debts are actually unpredictable no matter how good you are. But those that maximize safety, they have that skill. They know exactly when to quit.
When to turn
They're
around and
able
go
to
back.
quit. Develop that skill. And one of the best ways to develop that skill is that whatever happened before is almost irrelevant. It's a sunk cost. It's
Yeah.
almost irrelevant to your decision whether or not to continue, whether it's a project or an endeavor. So, I've invested so much in this. And it can be a relationship too. Yeah, but you're miserable. So look forward, not backward, and then evaluate your decision. So those are all skills that I help readers develop in the psychology of leadership that help mitigate goal-induced blindness. You also want to have you want to know when it's creeping in, right? So customer complaints, or just you want to have your radars out to capture it. So you remove the blinders, if you will.
And I would say we want the radar to coming not just from ourselves, because it's very easy to be self-blinded, but to have, whether it's customers, whether it's the rest of our team, whatever, and figure those things out along the way so that we don't find ourselves so singularly focused that those other problems start to show up. I'm looking at the clock, and there's no way we're gonna get to all the stuff that I wanted to talk about, which doesn't
This is too
surprise
much
me.
fun. We should do another one.
At all. I want to talk about number 11, which you suggest not only don't die on Everest, but that we should think about death. So because this is also goal related. And so I'd like us to talk about this one for a second. What's the principle here? Why does it matter to us?
Imagine that you're at the end of your life. Ask yourself, if you reflect back, what will you be most proud of? And if you're asked, what will you answer? Which factors drove your happiness? And this is what the research shows. It's a lot more about relationships with people around you than money or fame or anything else. And so think about death is kind of morbid, but it's a philosophical concept of completely zooming out on your life. And that is, Kevin, an incredibly positive thing to do because you gain perspective. It
Yep.
makes you more resilient to the day-to-day ups and downs, to the day-to-day setbacks. And that's where I was most of my career, overreacting to the day-to-day. But if you say, I have a lifelong mission, it brings meaning into your life. Stephen Covey has one of the, I think it might be the best selling book on self improvement of all time, The Seven Principles of Highly Successful People. One of his principles is begin with the end in mind. And he pushes it like, just what do you want to reflect on at the end of your life? And then he walks back and goes, let that guide your values and your day to day decisions. So it's incredibly powerful. And it's one of those things that has been in the literature in philosophy and in psychology for thousands of years.
Uh, One thing that's said about Stephen Covey is he wrote about stuff that had been around forever, but he wrote it in a way and gave us a new handle for it, which made it extremely valuable. Which is one of the reasons it's, if not the one of the most read books, purchased and read books on self improvement ever. Um,
I'll tell you, Kevin. It's very hard. I don't know about your experience. It's very hard to find the right title for a book. I don't know if you shared that experience, but for me, it was like, oh, this one, that one, and then my agent, and at some point it was The End in Mind.
yeah,
That was before
what am
this.
I really trying? Yeah, where are we really trying to go? Yeah, absolutely. So there's 18 principles. We've really only talked about two, and that's really all at this point we have time to talk about. But I want to ask another important question. So when we are talking with Sebastien Page, the author of Psychology of Leadership, and we'll tell you all about how to get a copy. I mean, you know how to go to Amazon, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And that'll be in the show notes and all those things. But one of the things that I want us to talk about, I in the open, I said this book in many ways is about us as a leader and that leadership, but yet leadership isn't really about us. What advice would you have for someone if they were working to apply some of the principles in the book? How can they use that wisdom to help their teams? What advice do you have for us now, putting our leader hat back on, and how do we help our teams with some of these ideas?
There's several counterintuitive findings in the psychology of leadership, and they all relate to helping your team perform best. You're right, Kevin. Realize it's not about you. It's about how you can foster a culture of high performance and develop others within the team. But some of the counterintuitive findings in the book are, for example, we all think leaders need to be fantastic communicators. Well, the higher you go in your organization, the more you need to be a listener, not a talker, a listener. And that's a little bit counterintuitive. It was for me as I was climbing up the corporate ladder. Or we think leaders need to be decisive and make quick decisions all the time. Well, some of the best leaders I've known knew which decisions were urgent and which decisions actually required some level of strategic patience, which is much harder and counterintuitive for hard charging leaders. We think leaders need to be unflappable and not feel stress. Absolutely not. Sports psychology will tell you that optimal performance does not occur at zero stress. In other words, stress increases performance up to a point,
Up to
after
a point.
which it hurts performance.
Yep.
But so leaders have to embrace that in their organization with people they work with and for themselves. And then we all think leaders need to build consensus, right? But very often, leaders need to be disagreeable and make a tough decision. And for extremely agreeable leaders, that can be difficult. You're really not a leader if you can't make the tough decision that's going to make some people unhappy at some point in time.
Principle 15 right there, by everybody, by the way. Listen, I want us to start to wrap up. I've got a couple of sort of questions which might on the surface seem different than where we've gone so far. But I'm curious, Sebastien, what do you do for fun?
I love to run. I'm a runner. I talk about it in the book. I actually have a runner on the in the front of the book, which relates to sports psychology a little bit. Um, Running is Kevin, an intrinsic motivation, right? You go out running, it's dark and no one cares. No one's watching you. You're not impressing anybody at the beach with skinny arms or a low heart rate. So to me, it's a great activity for relaxing. And by the way, it can be social too. I run with people more than 50% of the time. I'm out with other runners.
And what are you reading these days, Sebastian?
I just finished the book, The Gambling Man it's about Masayoshi Son, the CEO of SoftBank. They almost went bust about 4 times, is a fascinating leader, maybe not a leadership style to emulate in different ways. But before that, I read The NVIDIA Way, which is about Jensen Huang. And NVIDIA is a really important company right now. And that is a more interesting leadership style as well. So, Kevin, I like to read about billionaires. I have a few chapters about billionaires. Maybe we'll talk about that some other time. But those are 2 of them, and they have fascinating leadership styles. And the books are pretty honest, so I'd recommend them: The NVIDIA Way and The Gambling Man. 2
We'll
different
have
leaders.
we'll have links to both of those in the show notes, and of course, links to everything related to the psychology of leadership as well. Sebastian, where do you want to point people? How can they connect with you? Where do you want to let them know about you?
Find me on LinkedIn, very easy. Type my name, you'll find me. Or go to psychologyofleadership.net.
Psychologyofleadership.net. I didn't have that in my notes, or I'd have put it on the screen for those of you watching. Psychologyofleadership.net, or find Sebastian on LinkedIn. You will be glad that you did that. So before we finish, everyone, I want to ask you the question that I ask at the end of every episode. It's a simple question with an important answer. And the answer is one only you can answer. And that is, now what? What will you do with the information from this conversation? This conversation was perhaps entertaining. It might have been educational. It might have been inspirational. None of that will matter unless you take action on what you learned, and you must decide what action you will take. There are at least 2 of us here that hope that one of those actions is to buy a copy of this book. But beyond that, what ideas did you get from this conversation that you want to go take some action on? It's the answer to that question that makes this 30-ish minutes worth your time. I hope you'll do that.
Hopefully, no
Sebastian,
one's going to go and try to climb Everest, Kevin.
and one of those goals is to just leave Everest alone. If you did this, if you went 30 times, you start doing the probabilities. The odds of the dying seem to be going up, although you would hope he'd be learning something along the way. So listen, everybody. First of all, Sebastian, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Likewise.
And everybody else, if you enjoyed this, tell somebody else. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're watching or listening to this so you don't miss any episodes, including next week, because we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.